we'll move very swiftly on. The first question is about housing. Housing is obviously a very important issue in Bristol, and is a very important issue to students, ensuring that housing is both affordable and of a good quality in that you can actually live in the house. And there have been a lot of effort put in by the different universities at Bristol to try and put together registers of responsible landlords and put together recommendations of good properties and give advice to students. But even despite all of these efforts, housing still remains a very deeply controversial subject in the city and among the student population. So the question for you is, as mayor, what will you do to work to ensure that students have the housing that they need at the prices they can afford? Starting with you, Mr. Ferguson.
We live, sorry about my voice, it's so. Anyway, we live in a very expensive city. We live in an expensive city because it's a good and popular city, it's a growing city, and over generations we've not built enough housing. In fact, we used to own 30,000 of our own homes in the city. That's been eroded down to 27,500 now because of the right to buy. The right to buy has eaten into our social housing. We haven't built new council homes for decades, and we are starting to build new council homes now. So in only 3 years, I've had to pick up from a standing start in terms of homes. We have crazy national regulations that inhibit us. And I listen to the others, and actually they're talking about the need for national change in policy, and I agree with all of that. But I have to work within those limitations. I am negotiating with government to see if we can change the planning rules so that when a developer is developing new housing, they are they are committed to providing affordable housing on the back of it, without getting out of it by claiming that they can't afford it because of the land price. In effect, the land price should be taken out of the equation so that we get more affordable housing, 30% at least affordable housing on every single development in Bristol. I can't do that at the moment because of national regulations. There are so many other ways that we need to incentivise the building of new homes. We have 8,000 new homes with planning permission that are unbuilt. 2,000 of those are in the process of getting built. 6,000 are stuck. We should be charging council tax on unbuilt homes, and that would get them built. So I think we need a carrot and stick method to get many more homes built. But I am not allowed in a market economy to control the rents in a way that ideally we should, because you are paying far too much for your accommodation. I absolutely acknowledge that.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much.
Going down, are we?
Yeah. Yes, just as before.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, so my kind of background is when I was 16 and 17, I was homeless twice. No one really understands what it's like to be homeless until you are. You actually lose everything, and you never think it's going to happen to you. I never thought it was going to happen to me when I was 12 years old. 4 years later, lost everything, lost my flat, went into kind of a mental breakdown, and eventually lived in a tent. Living in a tent next to a little stream was very, very lonely, and that's the situation that many Bristolians are facing now. It's a situation which is not going to go away, no matter what the Bristol City Council spokespersons tell us. They're just going to go away. Nick Hooper, if that's a name to anyone, he's a service director at Bristol City Council. Now he earns £91,000 a year to tell the poorest people in Bristol to go and sleep under bridges rather than sleep in shop doorways. This problem isn't going to go away, and no matter, well, it's true, George, it's not going to go away. And my real experience of being homeless is, like I say, there's 1,000 empty buildings in Bristol right now which could be occupied. I've made a video recently, and it's called The Tale of the Two Cities, which is a kind of a play-off of Charles Dickens's book. Now, Bristol is a tale of two cities. There's people sleeping in tents, or there's people living it up. It's real, I can't believe it. We're living in 2016 and this is the situation we're living in. My friend over there, Leo, and I, we found a mansion essentially in Clifton Down, which is 30 bedrooms. It's completely empty and it's been empty for 2.5 years. That could house 200 people. We need radical solutions to fix this housing crisis, not just build, I'm not even interested in affordable homes, because what do we mean by affordable? We need to look at social housing, places where people can be part of, not just chuck them in a hostel and say, go and get your methadone script on a Monday morning. Absolutely, yeah. You know, places where people that can actually grow and be part of the community that they're now involved in. So, although building new homes is one aspect of it, it's actually getting the homes which already exist on the market back into use for Bristolians, including students as well. Thanks.
Yeah.
So the question was about students and quality of housing and affordability. I don't, council houses, we need them, yeah, because we've got a housing crisis, but there aren't going to be many students that are going to be very high up on the council housing list, or actually the social housing list. So what we're talking about here is private rented landlords. I would imagine for the majority of students that actually go to UE. And what we need to be looking at, I agree with Paul, we've got nearly 900 houses that are privately owned in the city that are currently stood empty. So it's about making sure that the housing officers are finding out who owns these houses and why aren't they being brought back into use. And if they're not going to be brought back into use, then we need to look at compulsory purchase orders, because we need our housing stock so that people can live in them, and that will do something to bring down the affordability levels. Working with universities, there's loads of student housing that's going up in the centre of the city. I'm very interested to know why that is £140, £150 a week. I think that's too much for students, but where are those students then going to go once that first year or that second year is out of, when they finish? Where do the universities think that the thousands of students, the places for students that they've brought into the city in the last few years, because tuition fees now bring money in, where I want to know where that strategy is, working with the universities and the housing officers, where is that strategy moving forward about where those students are actually going to be living in the communities? So there are a number of things that can be done, but it's a very tough circle that we've got to kind of round up, and there is a massive housing crisis that is the backdrop. But in terms of students, private landlords is where it's going to be really, other than the student accommodation that is currently being built around the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just like Christine said, I'm treating this question about being about students and how we sort out some of the problems that students are facing. The National Union of Students recently estimated that there was a shortfall in student living costs of about £8,000 between what they have to pay and what they're able to get in income from student loans and from maintenance grants. And the maintenance grants, of course, have now been replaced by maintenance loans, which is yet another burden of debt that's being put onto students. Let's be blunt about it. Rents are the new way in which students are being impoverished. What we find in a lot of areas is that accommodation is mainly provided by private companies and landlords, about 80% of it across the country. And there is a considerable difference in the amount of rents that are being paid. So if you're in the southwest, the average rent for student accommodation provided by the university is about £140 per week. For students that are living in private rental accommodation, it's £160 per week, and that's at the lowest end of the scale. So what do we do about it? Well, I've already started conversations with both Bristol University and the University of West of England, because again, Kristen is absolutely right, we need to start to see some investment back into the city about how we provide student accommodation at a more reasonable price. One of the things that has started to happen in London with the Green Party in London is a lot of Green Party students are lobbying now for something called a student living wage, and that student living wage is based on rents at 35% of average student income, so that will work out about £110 per week. I'll be really happy to work with any of you guys who want to start lobbying and start doing some direct action to get that done in Bristol as well. Thank you.
Yeah, student housing, student accommodation, it's always been a big issue. I would say one of the things we need to ask, one of the questions we need to ask certainly of the universities is it fair to be inviting ever growing numbers of students into the universities when there's fewer and fewer accommodation for second year students to actually move on to. What I would like to do as mayor is introduce a mayor's charter for letting agents where a stipulation of a minimum quality standard can be stated, and students and universities can advertise that as the place to go to actually rent property from, so that we can at least address a quality issue, because there are far too many properties across the city that are, quite frankly, a health hazard, as not just unfit for living in. What I think we also need to do, as Tony touched on, is we also need to work with the universities in the city and look at the possibility of actually creating smaller student accommodation opportunities across the city, co-funded by the council and the universities for second year onward students as opposed to first year students who are mainly on large campuses. These could be properties that could hold maybe up to 12 or 20 students, so they're much smaller, much easier to install and build and actually have up and running reasonably quickly. So I think we need to get a lot of people together around the table, especially universities, and actually see what we can do about looking at the numbers of students we have and actually having a unified city university approach to actually supplying suitable accommodation at an affordable price for students from year 2 onwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think we all recognise just how important our universities are to the success of the city. One of the biggest boasts for Bristol in presenting this image to the outside world of creativity and prosperity is that we have 2 world-class universities. UWE has a very high employment rate at the end of the track, and we've got this global reputation. And we know that we need those to continue to be successful. We also know that one of the biggest draws to Bristol universities, also I'm told by the university leadership they believe, is the quality of life. It's Bristol, the dynamism, the vibe, and all that type of stuff, the diversity. So obviously we know that the housing crisis facing the wider city and students in particular as well, it could be one of those things that's a real liability to that future success. Specifically in terms of students in private rentals, what we're talking about is extending the landlord registration scheme across the city, taking really proactive action against landlords who are letting substandard properties to all Bristolians, including students. And I think lining up with that, what we've got to do is work closely with our universities as well. I heard recently that a very senior member of this very university, his daughter was in Bristol University, and he found out that the landlord had the accommodation in appalling condition. So he happened to mention he was a very senior member of this university. Unless he sorted it out, he would fix it that landlord would not be able to rent to another Bristol student. It got sorted out. It shouldn't depend on connections. Yeah. Unfortunately, in Bristol, we have an establishment. It tells us it's not an establishment, but it is an establishment, and it can work like that. But I think there's another conversation. It's something I do ask students, not just to think about student life, but to think about the city. We have a challenge, we have a housing crisis, and student accommodation has an impact on wider Bristol. So we need to work with the university to say, what is the impact of an ever-expanding student body on the wider life in Bristol in terms of our ability to build stable, balanced communities that we can all feel safe in and give us a platform for a good life.
Very much.
Well, thank you very much. This is not just a student problem, is it? It's a citywide problem. There's an enormous shortage of housing in the city, and the rents and purchase prices are reaching ridiculous levels. In Bristol, there is something called the Acorns Letting Charter, which agents and landlords sign up to on a voluntary basis to agree that they will give reasonable terms to the tenant.